Picture this. You're at a backyard cookout or some type of gathering, and everyone is chatting like they do. You identify someone in a similar stage of life, and you exchange the normal pleasantries, small talk about the weather and sports and general culture. And you're trying to get a sense of what topics to avoid, what to pursue. So the subjects of work and family life come up. And this person is wonderfully conversant, and you start to wonder, can we talk about the pandemic? I don't want to argue about vaccinations and masks and the politicization of it all, but I might want to hear how the pandemic has affected your life and your family's life. For instance, I heard a story from a man who said he never really had the thoughts that he had until the pandemic. This whole thing has awakened him in so many ways. A woman who shared that the pandemic gave her an opportunity to ask, what is she really doing with her life? And so far, she knows that she didn't want to continue down the current road that she was on. And now she's a part of that great resignation. Or another friend who lost his mother recently. She was vaccinated and careful, but she got COVID and unfortunately passed away just after Christmas. In certain moments when people know or learn that I'm a pastor, the conversation will move towards what is life about and the meaning of it all and the hope and the pain and the hope again. But sometimes the conversation goes a completely different way. You might talk about the weather and current events, but when it comes to faith and religion, that thoughtful person that you're speaking to might say, no offense, Pastor, I like you and all, but I gave up on the church a long time ago. And they might tell you that the place is really just full of a bunch of hypocrites. Or share a story where they were terribly judged, or any number of stories that point to examples of bad religion. 3 initial things I want to say to you up front on that. When this happens to you, receive the story as faithfully as you can. Friends, if we are defensive in our reaction, we only confirm that we are more interested in protecting the institution of the church rather than listening to that person's experience or viewpoint. As Jesus followers, let's always listen with love. 2, I realize in a place like Grace Chapel that you may be the one who has just said to the person like me that you left the church. And if you are somehow listening today, I'm moved by that. It could be because you think Jesus has something to say to this broken world. It could be because you love someone who's very active in their faith, and this is a point of connection for the two of you. It could be that you really do dislike church culture, but every now and then you pop in for a reason that perhaps you've hidden in your heart. Which brings me to this 3rd quick point on this. Just about any time I listen to someone tell me about a church scandal that made them leave, or about a narcissistic leader that repulsed and repelled them, or from the turnoffs of a churchy or oversimplified answer that offers more guilt than faith and often asks you to turn off your thinking brain too. When it's my turn to speak, I often say, I very much agree with you. And depending on what was just said, it's usually something that I can relate with. Often I've been disappointed with the church, at times disappointed with myself. And when the conversation goes long enough, sometimes I get to say, I think it's a miracle of God's grace that I still believe and that I still get to serve the church. And sometimes I get to briefly express why the message and work of Jesus compels me to hold on to the hope of life that he invites all people to. I try never to preach at people in this moment, but today, this is a bit of what I wish I could say. First, it turns out that God hates all the hypocrisy and self-righteousness too. It turns out that God doesn't always like church as it sometimes plays out. And how do we respond when people share their hurts or disappointments about church? In this series of Promised Land, we are looking at the problems of faith that plague us and the promises of God that carry his people. Today we are in week 3 and we are tackling the problem of bad religion. So let's look at Isaiah 58 together. It reads, "Shout it out loud and do not hold back. Raise your voice like a trumpet. Declare to my people their rebellion, and to the descendants of Jacob their sins. For day after day they seek me out. They seem eager to know my ways, as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its God. They ask me for just decisions and seem eager for God to come near them. I mean, the way that this passage starts out, it sounds like it's going to be an uplifting passage. But God is calling out his people here. Tell the people where they have gone wrong. And so in verse 3, it continues. It's like the voice of the people is appealing, and they're saying, "Why have we fasted?" they say, "and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves, and you have not noticed?" Well, God answers here. "Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife and in striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. Is that the kind of fast I have chosen? Only a day for people to humble themselves? Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and for lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is that what you call a fast? A day acceptable to the Lord?" Now, just to pause here for a second. As we can see, like in verse 3, one of the awful practices that the children of Israel were committing was making everyone fast for the Sabbath and then forcing and demanding that they make up for that lost time by making them work even harder. Now, just about every modern day workplace is at risk of some form of this. Your supervisor, or maybe you're the supervisor, that says, "Hey, take some time to take care of yourself," which is nice. But then there's also that ongoing subtext that also says, "Just don't miss any of the important meetings or assignments. Take some time and rest, but make sure you get all caught up." It's like a modern day trap. Take a day off, but work 3 times harder than the following days. This is contributing to our burnout culture. Now, that's a little different than what Isaiah is saying in making your workers take a spiritual Sabbath and then exploiting them soon afterwards. But there is a point of us to pause on and reflect on, regardless of where you are in your organization. The next verse is very similar. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife and in striking each other with wicked fists, it says in verse 4. I mean, you might argue, well, yeah, they're hungry. Their blood sugar level is low. They're hangry. And it's a tense moment that escalates even further. But it's more than that. Think of it in your own context. It's any religious activity, whether it be fasting or coming to service on Sunday or watching from your home today or praying or reading the Bible, and then turning the page in your heart and acting like your faith has no bearing on your life. I want to be clear here, because I don't want us to walk around with unnecessary guilt, nor do we want to walk around with unchecked self-righteousness. It's not about losing our temper on a Sunday or a day when you have spent some time with the Lord. Part of the up and down of life is that you might begin your morning in a word of scripture and find yourself yelling at the kids because they're about to miss the bus because they're distracted by watching TikTok on their phone. No screens in the morning is like the 11th commandment in our home. Feeling either guilt or wishing you handled that moment better is not exactly the crux of it here, but that's a normal feeling. Instead, it's more about living your life with no connection to your faith, almost with a refusal to actually allow your faith in Jesus to direct your everyday life. It's not just about a bad day or moment. It's about living in direct contradiction to the way of God. It's about singing the praises of God on Sunday, but not caring about the needs around you on Monday. It's about learning certain aspects of Isaiah 58, but refusing to allow it to actually impact your heart, and then having the audacity of saying, "Is there anything interesting in Isaiah 59? What God is calling for here in Isaiah 58 is a true heart change. In fact, if we read this too quickly and misunderstand, we might think that God doesn't want fasting or other worship or religious practices. This is not an admonition to stop religious activity. It's a rebuke to stop empty piety and a clear call for heartful worship. Our hearts need to be changed, and God can help us change.